Hello and welcome to the January 10th IWWG bi-monthly open mic. I'm Kelly Dumar. I'm on the board of the International Women's Writing Guild. I'm so honored to be producing this evening for all of us, members, non-members. It's free and open to the public. And we're so happy that you are all here tonight. Couldn't be more delighted to be introducing a poet who is also a longtime member of IWWG, our beloved faculty member and poet Myra Shapiro, who's going to be our featured reader for tonight. And that is quite a thrill. I just want to remind everybody that the chat room is open. It's going to stay open. We're a community of women writers, and the support and the understanding and the encouragement that we give each other is really a wonderful and large part of what our aim is. So please feel free to mention in the chat room when one of our readers reads what you like or appreciate about her writing, what you identify with, and please feel free to put your comments for Myra in the chat room. Even though she's not going to interact in the chat room herself tonight, I'm going to record this. I'm going to send her an actual text of this tomorrow. I think our executive director, Michelle Miller, might be here, but she's here as a listener tonight. So just want to give a shout out to our wonderful executive director, Michelle Miller. And what we're going to do is hear from Myra. Then I'm going to be asking her some questions or giving some comments, and I'm going to be inviting you to post a question, or possibly we may have time for a comment or two. But if you want to ask Myra a question, please put it in the chat room where I will be able to see it, and then I will ask as many of the questions that we're going to have time for before we go into the open mic. And we end approximately at 8:30. All right. Now, I want to say a little bit about Myra. I find her as a poet as such an inspiration, as a woman, as a longtime guild member, as a poet, as a faculty member. Hey, raise your, put in the chat room. I'm just guessing that there is a fierce number of women who have been in one of her poetry workshops at the Guild. Yeah, raise your hand or put it in the chat room. How many of you have been, I count myself as one, not even just one, but probably many of Myra's workshops for the International Women's Writing Guild. I would be surprised if there weren't many of us here who've sat and listened to her wonderful passion for poetry. I'm sure you've heard her in our open mic over the years. It may surprise some of you to know that Myra has been a member of the International Women's Writing Guild since, and I've got a lot of specificity here, Monday, May 31st, 1993.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a good long time. Do you remember that, Myra?
Yes.
Okay, I'm so glad. Now, one really fun anecdote I want to tell takes us back to more recent time of July 2019, summer. We were at Muhlenberg College, where we were having our annual summer conference. And it was the start of the summer conference. It was our first night. It's a week-long conference. We're all there together, gathering, and about to break into our whole week of writing in so many genres, with just the whole spirit of excitement about seeing old friends, making new friends. Everything was there. The power of women getting together and their voices, sharing them. And we heard that Myra Shapiro's poem, "These Are the Pearls," had just been published in the New Yorker. Right on the day starting our conference. Oh my gosh, we just hooted and hollered. And of course, she read it for us live in our open mic. And what a treat and a delight and wonderful moment of synchronicity that was, to have Myra with us on that wonderful event of the publication of that particular poem. I asked Myra permission if I could read a longer bio of her tonight, because she's been such a force of women's power with using their voices in the Guild for so long, that this is just a great chance for us to really appreciate and understand more about Myra and her roots and where she's been. So I'm going to read this bio about her. Myra was born in Bronx, New York, the daughter of Ida Leader Stein and David Stein, a businessman who moved the family to northwestern Georgia when she was 9 years old. She graduated from the Ward Belmont School, a boarding school for girls in Nashville, in 1949. She briefly attended college before marrying her college sweetheart, Harold M. Shapiro, in 1953. Together, they raised their family of 2 daughters in Chattanooga, where Myra returned to college in the early 1960s, receiving a BA in 68 from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. She credits her reading of Betty Friedan's now classic, The Feminine Mystique, published in 1963, with inspiring her to seek a life beyond marriage and motherhood. After working for several years as an English teacher and a librarian and completing a master's in English at the Bread Loaf School at Middlebury College in 73, that's in parentheses, weirdly enough. The master's degree from Middlebury is in parentheses. Shapiro began writing in earnest in 81. That year, with her youngest daughter off to college, Myra sublet for a few months the first of several apartments in New York City to focus on her writing and attend poetry workshops with many of the renowned poets of the time. And by the late 80s, the Shapiros moved to New York year-round, as a growing number of Myra Shapiro's poems appeared in numerous literary journals and anthology. She completed an MFA in writing at Vermont College in 93. Myra Shapiro's first collection of poetry, I'll See You Thursday, was published in 96 by Blue Sofa Press and edited by Robert Bly. Her memoir, 4 Sublets, Becoming a Poet in New York, was published in 2007. The same year, she published a chapbook entitled In Greenwich Village, We Talk of Love, both published by what is now Antrim House Books. I'm sorry, that was Chicory Blue Press. In 2012, she published another collection of her poems, 12 Floors Above Earth, and that's Antrim House Books. She received numerous awards for her writing, including the Dylan Thomas Poetry Award, the New School, 1981, and the Allen Ginsberg Poetry Contest Honorable Mention in 2014.
Wow.
She's held several fellowships and been invited to take part in many readings, from the Library of Congress to the Cornelia Street Cafe in Greenwich Village. She serves on the board of the Poets House and for many years has taught poetry for the International Women's Writing Guild. Now, one other quick treat I have in store for you, and this one you'll take with you. I'll put it in the chat room. I found a link to, how many of you are fans of Terry Gross and Fresh Air and the reviewer Maureen Corrigan? Well, I found a link to Maureen Corrigan's interview with Myra on Fresh Air from April 27th, 1998. You can listen to this. It's wonderful. Myra says, we take responsibility and we can make the world a better place. I am thrilled and honored to introduce you to Myra Shapiro tonight. Welcome, Myra.
Well, Kelly, you take my breath away, because it's like listening to a story about another person. The past. But especially because of what you said at the end. When I decided what I was going to read tonight, I thought, no, I'm going to take responsibility for what's this crazy week that we've been through. And somehow I can't get it out of my mind, so I might as well choose what I'm going to read from, if not this week, this year. And the fact that I'm thrilled we're all here together, but how I wish it were in person. I'll start with a poem from the first book called Just Now. Midnight, spring rain, and the city expectant waits. I'm the Russian doll, the one inside, intact. My heart wants only to adore, to stare from a window 7 stories high above a door held by a doorman at its side. Buildings swell around me, rectangles of light. Mercer Street's lamps bend toward a line in the harbor, and on my corner, an isolated man bends under his umbrella. I can't believe I've made it to this innermost place. A cup, a bed, 4 chairs around a table. And the reason I chose that poem, it's called Just Now, only it was written in the 1980s. And this time of solitude that we're experiencing, lockdown that we're experiencing, for me, I live alone. It's that solitude that I came to New York to experience, that I had great comfort from. And so even though I wouldn't choose it for now, in terms of the conditions of now, I understand how much solitude has meant to me and probably for most of us who are writers, and yet never without community. And I thought that's what I must mean by 4 chairs around a table, because that was, strange. That's what I ended with. So it's that doubleness of wanting the solitude and the 4 chairs around the table, all of you. I'll move on from Just Now, which was the 1980s, to Ireland. At the Edges, County Mayo, Ireland. This is a poem for Grace Paley. Without branches, a bird will rest elsewhere. There are no trees on Achill Island. Without the sough of trees, there is the sea. And bird sound, a chough, it creates fear. The land bears full force October, sea, and rain, and I am somewhere I have never been, in a B&B with Jesus, dying on the wall of the dining room. How can I eat? At night, I have to dream myself a round woman in a belt of threads, blue and orange fringes, haphazardly hanging. Toots, she calls from her booth at the World's Fair. Grace, I say. May I trim the belt strings? She says yes, so I hold the scissors close to her body, and the strings become a nest of yarns. And I wanted to read this poem because of the comfort that Grace Paley always, I love her work. I loved her as a person. And the fact that I dreamed her when I was in Ireland, feeling very strange there, was important. But what is equally important now is how much words are a gift. The last word in that poem in particular, yarns. I trim the strings until they become a nest of yarns. And I realized only after I'd written that word, it seemed logical, strings, wool, they make a sweater, warm you. But what yarns also do is tell stories. Yarns are that very life-giving thing, stories. And that's grace. So words, 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 words. I've got a new poem I'll read at the ends about words being the blanket on my bed. But I'll go on now to what? Oh, to a devastating earlier madness that we were confronted with on 9/11. And I think that came back to many of us. This week, only this week, was from insiders invading a kind of, you would say, sacred space. And why also I want to read this poem is because people from the Guild are in it. So you'll hear of them. And I also mention in this poem a conference that I go to every year that takes place the month before the Guild's meeting. And I refer to it. Galway Canal is there. Women were falling. On the edge of a lake, Galway recited his poems of the Twin Towers falling. It was long, it was brilliant, and I wanted it to go on. I said so. He smiled. Myra, you are always in my heart. I held those words for later. Behind illumination, inquisition, exile, filling a conference, recollecting the golden age of Spain. Midnight, I ran away from the others to unroll. Myra, you are always. And that was that. Down I went in one moment, straight down, as if pulled by the ground below. Then Marie fell, walking to the movies. Susan lost her footing on the porch steps, and Eunice tumbled on the gravel. Little simulacra, all of us falling one by one before September came again. And what that also taught me is the minute you say, Myra, you are always, watch out. Nothing is always. And so I will move toward the end. I want to read one poem that's new and then end with a very short poem that's new. This new one called Living Through. A friend at the end of Long Island calls to ask how, where I am. It must be June. I'm here where I live, to live through the virus. The sun is on its summer spin, traveling north to Union Square. I am grateful to my husband who asked for a roof for sunsets and fireworks, who tended to desire, to broken pipes and freedom, to what's hard to remember except by what's undone. Now he's gone. The house in disarray. It sits unkempt like this country without a keeper. Boxed in each night, the moon sits between buildings I cannot walk the streets to see. There is the root, there is the sun, its arc, a reassuring calendar from June to December, from 14th Street to Battery Park, where the lady in the harbor waits patiently for liberty. And I almost want to say for diversity. The lady in the harbor stands to welcome exiles, diversity, and that's what we have to celebrate and be conscious of, I think. Anyway, I'll end with Duvet, a poem that I mentioned earlier that celebrates words, which are the great comfort to me now. Called Duvet. Words are the blanket on my bed. Sheep and ducks gave up their coats for me. Traveling back roads, sleep gave up dreams for me to understand how warm the world can be. And I thank you for this chance to read the new poems, go back to the old ones, which I'd almost forgotten, and move on, move on. Oh, I'll say that poem real fast. I mean, not real fast, but I'll say it about the inheritance, because it's that sense of hope, I think, through a grapefruit, the inheritance, just a grapefruit, but it never fails to make the word mama when I cut it, store the half uneaten flat against a plate, pink meat down, so that tomorrow when I eat it, it's as juicy as today. Washing fruit, she taught us, but never this. She just did it, saved the fruit against the plate, as I do, as I saw it done in my daughter's house this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Myra. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We have, I know I have a couple of questions that I would love to ask you about. And one of them is, I think that listeners would be interested in your practice, your approach to writing poetry today,
Well,
in this day and time of your life.
This day and time. Well, what I'm grateful for is that I'm grateful for Betty Friedan, who wrote that book that started me thinking about who am I? You know, who could I be if I weren't? Sometime I'll read the poem "Knee," which starts from when I changed my maiden name to Mrs. and then later on became Ms. And so that whole passage. But today, because at least I've been writing now since my 50s, I've had the chance to build a facility so that words come to me without a lot of thought. And I think those are the gifts that come when you let yourself be the person you are, when you find the life that fits. And I have found the life that fits. So I'm
that's a really a beautiful thought. I want to tell you something that really surprised me and disturbed me a little bit in reading this memoir. I forget the name, the recent well, fairly recent, one of his last books, Donald Hall wrote about, it was a memoir he wrote. He said poetry, writing poetry was so hard. He didn't want to do it anymore. And what I'm hearing you say right now is kind of the opposite, that it's not easy. I'm not going to suggest that it's easy to write poetry, but it doesn't sound to me like in your 8th decade that poetry's become too hard to write.
No, and I write it differently, as I said, without the same, I don't know, I really feel the gifts, like the words that, they're just sudden. I can't think right now what they are. That's what I'm doing. I'm writing a poem and I can't think. And suddenly I just keep writing. As I say when I teach, just keep going. And a word will be there to surprise me. And that, I think, comes from writing for a long time.
Are you writing a poem every day, Myra? I know you read a poem every day. Tell us about that.
Well, see, that's it too. I didn't mention that. All these years of reading, I can't imagine writing without reading, nor can I imagine writing without community. I have a poetry group and we meet every 2 weeks, even now on Zoom. And so that it's hearing the poems of other people. And the last poem I wrote was called Thieving Beauty. Susan Wyman is on. She helped me with that title, Thieving Beauty. And I started with Stealing Beauty. No, that I think I didn't have quite enough nerve to say that, but it's the same thing, Thieving Beauty. And I've come to a time when I also think, through all the reading that I do, I can take a phrase from somebody, a word that strikes me when I'm reading. I write it down and I find a place for it and I fit it into what I'm writing. And it seems like shoplifting. It seems that way. But I also think that it's a way of passing on beauty. Why should everything stay stuck inside?
Well, that's a beautiful way of saying that and thinking about that. I would love to have you tell us about I happen to know that you're working and have been working on a manuscript, and it's pretty much complete. Yes, and I wonder if you would like to just talk a little bit about that.
Well, the manuscript, half of it is about the illness of my husband and his death. And the realization that you think we know this from the start, but somehow it just never hit me until my husband died that I was going to die.
Yeah.
And so that's a good part of the manuscript. And I'm peddling it, but so maybe just saying it will be lucky, because how many people want to read that about an awareness of death, and then the death you suffer, the loss, tremendous loss. These are the pearls that I read.
Yeah.
So I think it's a hard time for that kind of manuscript, but onward. It's really the poems I'm writing now, I wouldn't even put into it. I would say I'm at the beginning of a new time.
Yes, yes. Listen, so to our listeners here tonight, if it would matter to you that Myra would share this word, would you read it because she's dealing with the theme of mortality, perhaps? Say something to her about that in the chat room so she can read that tomorrow and have a sense of whether or not anybody wants to read her beautiful poetry about, because Myra, I need your book. I mean, you're maybe a couple of decades ahead of me, or maybe one or two, but I kind of really think that there's a lot that I might learn about that from you.
I'm going to interrupt you, Kelly, because you are such an accomplished person. You can do anything. Become a publisher.
Okay, and then publish your book.
And see, we've
Okay, I'm going to have to publish Myra's book now. Maybe some of you will help me. I think I know I'm guaranteed. So tell them what the title is, because if you don't mind.
it's When the World Walks Toward You.
And beautiful, beautiful. So tell her what you think of the title too. If you're going to say something nice about it. If
No,
not, don't say it.
any which way. I love feedback, and I never take it as nice, not nice. No, I love feedback. When the world
So,
walks toward you, tell me if you like it.
okay, good. When the world walks towards you. I know there's a couple of hands. I'm going to get to them. I promise. I have to say this one thing. I have to ask this one question, and then I will get to the couple people who raised their hands. Grace Paley, how'd you meet her?
Well, I read her, of course, before I met her, because there I was in Tennessee, Georgia, and so, and she spoke my language. She's her voice is the voice of the Bronx, and so I took to her, and then when I was in the village, I discovered she lived right here, near on 11th Street. I think it was 11th or 13th, anyway, close by. And one night I went to a reading and she was going back home and I was. So we shared a taxi and we went to have coffee together. And so that was meeting her. But and walking across the bridge with Poets House, the Brooklyn Bridge, their annual event. I did that with her. But she was kindred from the start.
Wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you for letting me in on that little tidbit. And so I think Laura Rutland, you seem to have raised your hand.
Oh.
Yes. And so I'm going to give you a chance to ask your question or make your comment. And so I'm asking you to unmute. Are you there, Laura?
I am here, yes.
Good.
I didn't know I was going to come on here because I had just raised my hand when you asked a question earlier, but I'm really glad to speak to Myra.
Yes.
And I'll try to think of a question very quickly. Are you finding it more or less difficult or just the same to write in these strange conditions of aloneness that we are all living in?
Oh, I don't. The poems are different, but no, I don't know how to answer that really, because every period of life presents itself in its own way. I've said this before. I think I always think of life as a book with a lot of with all the chapters. So you go from one chapter to the next to the next. They're all different, and then of course you come to the end, don't you? But yeah. So the thing is now coming toward the end, so I'm dealing with those chapters. But what I thought you were going to ask me about was Georgia.
Well, that's what we have in common.
Yes, we do. And this last week, there it was on the front page of the New York Times. Dalton, Georgia.
Yes. Thank you for being a poet who is going through the chapters, this chapter, and letting us be there along with you in this chapter, Myra. So important. Because this is what strikes me, is that you really do live as a poet. And so then we need that. I need that. So I very much appreciate your willingness. And it's been really so wonderful to hear you tonight. I'm gonna just really thank you. It's a little bit harder to make applause when we have 60 people on the call, and trying to get 60 people to unmute and then mute again. It's complicated. So let's just all wave our hands wildly. And Myra, one thing I want to let you know is that if you hit the arrow, so I'm going to go ahead and remove your spotlight.
Yes.
And if you, there's an arrow, like a blue arrow somewhere on your screen, you will find it. And if you press that, you can scroll through to see who all the people are.
Yes, I do know.
Good. Okay, excellent. Now, it's time, Katerina, for me and you to put our attention now back on the open mic. And I want to check in with you to see if you have any questions. And Myra's going to be here, and I'm actually going to stop the recording. As I said,